Okay. Are you happy? Do you have any questions before we start?
No, I think we just need to crack on, eh?
Yeah, okay, good. All right then. Okay, that's great. Joining us now on Carers World Live is Graham O'Malley from the Citizens Advice Bureau. He's a debt expert. Welcome to the programme, Graham.
Hi there.
Debt is the sort of subject, of course, and money and all that sort of thing is really the sort of centre of modern life in a way. So what sort of problems do you see at the Citizens Advice Bureau on debt and money matters?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me. So we see a big range of debt problems. The problems, I guess, have changed from credit debt, so borrowing, to more household debt. I think one of the big problems when you're faced with a change in circumstances is what you might be entitled to financially changes as well. So it's not just that you have debts. There's lots of other things to take on board. So we'd always say, do get advice, get that free, independent advice, get it free from someone like Citizens Advice. There's Carers UK, Carers Direct as well. And get that early, so don't wait for the problems to mount up and before they come out of control.
So you're suggesting that in effect that this is really something in ordinary life that you should be thinking about, never mind whether you're a carer or not?
I think that's fair to say, yes. So debt affects lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds, but of course there will be sort of unique considerations for people who are caring. I spoke about exploring what might be out there financially. I think that's a really good place to start. So maybe taking a step back from the debt. Look at the benefit system. That might be a good place to start. You might already be in receipt of benefits. You might have left work and be encountering the benefit system for the first time. Probably an obvious one to look at would be carers allowance. So if you move out of work or reduce your work and you're caring for 35 hours or more a week, carers allowance is something you can claim. Look at the other benefits you might already get or be entitled to for the first time. So universal credit, if you're in a universal credit area. If you're not, then income support if you've left work, housing benefit to help with rent, council tax support to help with council tax, these sorts of things. There's also support for homeowners. So if you have a mortgage, there might be help towards your mortgage interest payments, although that is now a loan from the government. So do take advice before agreeing to that. Also look at the person you're caring for. So they're likely to be in receipt of benefit already, but do look at their benefit assessments. Are they getting the right amount of something like employment and support allowance? Are they getting the right amount of personal independence payments? Benefits affect benefits as well, so the whole system is quite complicated. So we would always say get advice. That could be from us at Citizens Advice, it could be from another organisation, but you don't have to pay for that advice.
Benefits we're all sort of, it's all, sorry, go on, Graham, go on, carry on.
I was going to say, benefits are not just the only thing to look at. There's other support as well. Council tax is a big area. There's plenty of discounts available, depending on if somebody's severely disabled and can't access all the rooms in their house. If you're on low income, there's lots to look at in terms of council tax. And the local authority should also look at a care assessment for you. So what you want to achieve as a carer, how much care you can give, how you're feeling emotionally, and what you might need in terms of support to achieve that care plan. So they might help financially with things like taxi fares or services for things like housekeeping or gardening if that's something you can no longer keep up with.
I mean, at times people tell us on Carers World Radio Plus that they often feel that no matter how much they plan, that life somehow throws a curved ball, to use that phrase, at them. And they end up in perhaps a situation where they're bewildered, not quite sure what to do, look at various things on the internet, on websites, discover they haven't really got answers to their questions. So how do you sort of take a deep breath, if you like, and start to do the sorts of things you're talking about? So can you pause a
Yeah,
moment?
I,
Hang on, can you pause a moment? Sorry. Do you want me to ask you that again?
yeah, please.
Okay. Does that moment comes perhaps when you start to feel bewildered and it all becomes too much for you? You look on websites and you don't really get the answers to your questions. In that state of bewilderment and perhaps powerlessness, how do you actually take the deep breath, and where do you start to try to take back control?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and nobody can pretend that's easy. There's lots of information out there, but I would say on that, don't just Google debt advice, because you might not, the first hit you get might not be the most reputable source. It's difficult. Don't put the pressure on yourself to take it all in and understand it all. Not all at once. That's why we're here. That's why we've got trained advisors, both in benefit law and in debt advice law as well. So we can help you make sense of that. It's great if you feel able to go online and do a bit of research first. I'm sure that can help. But ultimately, if you're feeling very bewildered, as you say, that's why we exist. We're here to guide you through your rights, what you're able to do. We're able to support you in that way. Do open up to us. Don't be shy. The advice and the support is out there.
And how do you tell that the source of advice is reputable? Obviously, the Citizens Advice Bureau has had a reputation going back years and obviously has a trusted name. But if you can't, for example, get in touch, or you're finding difficulty getting in touch with CAB, what are the sort of indicators, if you like, of a reputable source?
Yeah, okay, so on getting in contact with us, we do have various routes as well. So if you go on citizensadvice.org.uk, we do offer advice through web chat, on the phone as well, and face-to-face. Money Advice Service, they also have a website, which is moneyadviceservice.org.uk. They've got a debt advice locator search on there. Everybody on there is free, impartial, and reputable. So again, yeah, if you're feeling a bit bewildered, not sure where to start, that's a good place. There has been a lot of talk in our industry. We're a bit worried, a bit concerned about people Googling debt advice and not necessarily getting the best source of advice first off. Usually you need to scroll down 5 or 6 hits before you get to the reputable sources. So yeah, do take care. You can also go on the FCA's website, the Financial Conduct Authority. They regulate debt advisors. So if you put a name in their register, it will show if that firm is regulated to give debt advice.
Presumably, in this type of situation where you're looking for money advice of this sort, I mean, are you looking for sources that are free? Is free a good indicator, or making sure there's no product involved that might be a source of bias, perhaps, for the person you're asking?
Yeah, so we feel free is best. We provide free advice. We always have done. It's not tied to any other interests. So what I would say is you don't need to pay for good debt advice. We're not the only free providers. There are other good, reputable providers. And like I say, the Money Advice search tool is a really handy one to start with.
And many of our viewers or certainly a significant number of our viewers on Carers World Radio Plus, get frustrated at the fact that, for example, solutions may be online, or you might have to do an online chat with someone. I know in the past, the Citizens Advice Bureau had lots of offices, and you made an appointment, you went in, you saw someone face to face before people started to move towards websites and new technology. Is that old face to face contact still possible?
It certainly is, yeah. I mean, we have outlets in, I think at last count, about 3,500 locations when you take in all the outreach venues that we attend as well. So we are in a lot of locations. We do have to be mindful that we've got open up those avenues, so people might want to contact us, like you say, through web chat or on the phone. But yeah, we're definitely there. We're definitely face to face, and I'm old-fashioned. That's how I prefer it.
It's good to hear. For the moment, Graham O'Malley from the Citizens Advice Bureau, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Right, okay. Now we're going to move. Okay, you okay so far?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay. Right, I'm going for the second session. Welcome back on Carers World Live to our thread running through the programme this evening on debt advice and money matters. With me is Graham O'Malley from the Citizens Advice Bureau. Welcome back, Graham.
Hi there. Hi.
We looked at some of the principles and some of the ideals that people should be searching for. Perhaps we could talk a bit more about the mechanics of the debt advice process. So you've made your appointment, you're there, we're in the old-fashioned face-to-face, let's take that. It's probably a scenario our viewers can understand particularly well. So you're there, how do you go about working out what someone needs? Because they might not even actually know what they need themselves.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'd like to take it slightly back one step and just before. So you're going to get debt advice. How can you prepare? Because I think if we can help people prepare for their appointment, they'll get the best out of it. So there's various ways you can do that. Just starting to gather the paperwork together is really helpful. Now I know that can be quite a difficult task in itself, but just recent letters from each of the organisations you might owe money to, evidence of what you spend your money on, and obviously evidence of your income is really, really helpful. And debt advisors might actually have to ask for things like proof of your identity. That's just something we have to do with the rules that we have to follow. So just getting that organisation, those files of paperwork is really handy for us. Have a go at a budget. We'll do that during the session, but if you've never done one before, it will get you thinking along the right lines. If you're able to speak to the people you owe money to, this day and age, most of them should be sympathetic. Well, they all should be, but a lot of them will be and give you that breathing space to take advice. And then, yeah, you attend your appointment, and the session, it's good to know what to expect when you get there. So debt advice session can be quite lengthy. It's quite a detailed process. An advisor will ask a fair few questions, but their job is to explore and get as much information so they can give you the best advice possible. But what they should start by doing is giving you a bit of time and space to explain, to say how you feel, say what's changed recently, and how we've got where we've got at that point in time. They won't be judgmental, and they will listen, most importantly. They'll then move on and they'll draw up a budget with you. So they'll look at what's coming in, they'll look at what you're spending your money on. That'll help them start to give the right advice for you. But at the same time, they'll start to look at ways you might increase your income, as we talked about before. They'll even suggest ways that you might reasonably reduce your outgoings, and that's not being judgmental. That's that they're trying to help you get your money to go a little bit further. The next stage then is to look at if there's anything that's an emergency. So if things have already reached quite a late stage, like let's say for instance a bailiff's involved, or a landlord is about to take action to try and evict you, they'll look at those instances, those issues first, and they'll try and make contact very quickly with those organisations. Once the emergencies are dealt with, we go through what's called we'll prioritise the debt. So we categorise debts as priority or non-priority. Now, the priority debts are the ones that we'll arrange the payments with first, and that's things like your rent or mortgage, or your gas, electricity, council tax. The reason we choose these first is if those go unpaid, those organisations have stronger powers. So for instance, eviction with a landlord, disconnection with gas, electricity, court fines ultimately can lead to imprisonment. So it's really those things we tackle first. And then we'll look at the budget again. and we'll start to come up with options that will deal with all of your debts. And that's the ins and outs, the implications of all these options. They'll take into account what we call your best interest. So we'll look at what you want to achieve, what's affordable, how long that might take, and we'll go through all those options. Just to give a couple of examples, if somebody does have something they can offer to creditors, but that's not what the creditors have been after, we might look at something called a free debt management plan. So grouping your creditors together, making a single payment that's distributed to those people, and it will clear your debts over a longer period of time. If the debts are just so big, then yeah, we might look at something like a debt relief order, which ultimately, if you meet certain conditions, will write off most debts. Or indeed, bankruptcy can be a really big fresh start. It's a detailed process, but with the right advice, and you can understand that process, and it can be a fresh start. At the end of the session,
sorry, I'll let you finish the session.
At the end of the session, they'll recap, they'll give you time to ask questions, and they'll agree what's going to happen next. They'll confirm their advice in writing. And if you do need time for all this to sink in, because it was all new stuff, then they'll give you that time, maybe another couple of weeks, just to think of a few more questions, because these are really big decisions.
So will you, for example, advocate on people's behalf, speak to, say, a utility who's owed a lot of money, or a landlord who's demanding their rent? Are you able to speak on the person's behalf to maybe give them that feeling of support beyond your valuable appointment?
Yeah, sure. So I can't speak for absolutely every service, but usually a citizen's advice, there will be a team of debt advice caseworkers who will take on the role of a caseworker and see the case through to its end. And a lot of that initial work will be, particularly with those priority creditors, we'll be speaking to them, making arrangements with the client's consent, of course, just to arrange those first. We have to prioritize our workload. We're obviously quite busy, but we'll try and prioritize it to those who need the support the most. So yes, that offer is usually going to be there.
And is there a sort of follow-up process so people can feel that they're supported all the way through? Because I'm guessing that's the key feeling people have, is once they've made the decision to come and speak to you, which is probably a biggish decision in itself to come and share it with someone else, you try then your best to sort of leave people with that feeling of continuing support, that they can come back at any time for further help?
Yeah, so again, I guess it's that point that we will prioritize our caseloads according to those who need the support. So the most vulnerable will get that ongoing support more readily. Other people who need the advice but maybe more able to deal with their affairs afterwards, will empower them to sort of self-help. But yes, a lot of casework happens, and those cases can last a few months while issues are resolved, while contact is made and arrangements are made. But yes.
And in these days of concern over collection of data, for example, the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, if I've got that right, and I've no doubt you'll be on the phone telling me if I've got that wrong. But how confident can people feel about speaking openly with you, and that open discussion will remain confidential between the person and your representative at CAB?
Sure. No, that's a really important message, is that we are confidential. Our service is confidential. Of course, under GDPR, there are strong rights for people about their information and how it's shared. So if we are going to negotiate, advisors will go through our sort of standard data protection statement with you. We'll get you to sign consent so we can share that if we need to with those that you owe money to. We record on our case management system. We record the advice that we give. That is obviously a safe system that stays within citizens' advice. And other than that, we wouldn't be sharing any personal data with anybody else.
Okay, great. For the moment, Graham O'Malley from the Citizens Advice Bureau, thanks very much indeed. We'll come back for a final session a little later on in the programme.
Thank you.
Okay, right, break. I've actually got a question from a viewer in this last part. It's about attitude of the insolvency service in a bankruptcy.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Now the other thing I'm going to do, obviously we're looking about the vulnerability bit this time, your third subject. What I'm going to do on the end of it, there's something you may or may not have heard of. You mentioned Carers UK at the beginning. They produce a report every year called The State of Caring.
Right.
And I'm going to quote you some percentages from this document, because our viewers will have heard about it earlier on in the programme.
Okay.
And I'll just tell you these figures now. You don't have to remember them because I'll feed them into it. But just so you know what they are, it's 37% of carers who reply. There's about 7,000 replies. 37% describe their financial situation as struggling to make ends meet. 47% say they've had to cut back on essentials such as food and heating to survive each month. 35% felt they had to give up work in order to care for the person they're looking after, and 16% had to cut their hours to live up to their caring responsibilities. So it's pretty harsh figures.
Yeah.
Probably why you're getting very busy. So I'm just going to get your reaction to those at the end of this one, because this is the third and final session. By the way, when I finish this one off, could you just stay on the line so we can make sure it's recorded? Okay, I'm sure it will have done, but just don't cause panic. Oh God, I'm going to have to do it all over again. Well, anyway, hopefully not. So I'm just going to tack those on the end, if that's all right. So if you're ready, we'll go into the. Let me know when you're ready.
It's had some contact details towards the end.
Yeah, I mean, what we're going to do, just to help you, is the program will be broadcast on the front page of the site, so we're going to be putting up contact details in the front, so you don't need to worry too much about saying them. They'll be up on the site, but if you want to say them, that's fine in the interview. That's no problem. No problem. Okay. Well, if you're ready, we'll do the last one now. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Go for it.
Jolly good. Okay. Right. Welcome back to Carers World Live, and to our debt and money advice expert this evening, Graham O'Malley from the Citizens Advice Bureau. Welcome back, Graham.
Hi there. Thank you. I'm really enjoying this.
Good. That's good to hear. Well, hopefully our viewers are learning a lot from what you're saying. I mean, it's a lot of things are fairly basic, but that's very important to get to the basics in what can be a bewildering subject. And of course, carers really, and from what they tell us, and we've got a question for you in a moment, but from what they tell us, that, you know, they're feeling vulnerable, whether they've just become a carer or whether they've been a carer for a long time, looking after a person, a friend or relative that they're caring for. How is this vulnerability addressed? Because earlier on you mentioned making arrangements, deferring payments, coming to arrangements with companies. And in a sense, I'm sure it's not the way you intended it, but perhaps it comes across as not easy, but not difficult. But dealing with utility companies, and as we'll hear in a moment from one of our listeners, the insolvency service, there's been an absolute nightmare. They're just intransigent and will not listen. How do you deal with that? How do you help the vulnerable carer in that type of situation?
Sure. Vulnerability is something that particular industries have really tackled over the last few years. Now, I've been in debt advice for 12 years. And particularly in the finance sector, things seem to have improved. I'll go through why I think that might be the case. The Financial Conduct Authority is the regulator for the banks, the credit cards, catalogues, doorstep lenders, those sorts of lenders, and they're very strong when it comes to their rules and what they expect. So in their own rule book that must be followed, should be followed when organisations are collecting debt, there's very strong and obvious rules about taking account of people's circumstances and ability to pay, and not bypassing people like debt advisors, so not ignoring contact from debt advisors, and respecting wishes around contact times. The FCA also expects, and has this as a rule as well, that all their firms that they regulate must have policies to identify those who are vulnerable and to treat them fairly. So we've got some strong rules to rely on. Now, things have improved, as I've said, in my experience, but they're never perfect. But that's in the finance sector. The utilities, so the gas and electricity companies, their regulator Ofgem is saying a lot of the right things. So I'm quite positive that there'll be more change in future. That's got to embed itself in practice. We're aware of that. We've got a very strong energy and consumer team at Citizens Advice that does a lot of campaigning in that sort of area. But there are standards there. Now, debt advisors will know about these standards, and this is why I think sort of free and impartial debt advice is crucial, because we can advocate, as we've said, we can help support people to make complaints where people haven't been treated fairly. And we can also add evidence through case studies to our campaigning work as well. So there's kind of that longer term win that we're always after. So I think things have improved, but if we encounter problems, we will support, we will advocate, and we'll also turn that into evidence where necessary.
But in terms of, for example, I'll probably feed in at this point, it's Jonathan from Warwick tells us about the insolvency service. It's quite a long and complicated story, so let's try and boil it down to the details. Basically, he feels like he's been pushed into a stream, and the fast-running stream is just taking him along. He's finding officials at the insolvency service not willing to listen, got a job to do, got targets to meet, aren't prepared to listen to what's happening, and basically taken over his life. And he's saying he feels utterly helpless, no one to complain to, because the complaints procedure is internal to the service. Now, obviously, the insolvency service aren't here to defend themselves or to put their point of view. But if we take this at face value, what would you, if he came to you, what would you say? How would you start when he's got this feeling that basically he's completely out of control?
Right. So yeah, I'm sorry to hear about that case. It sounds like a very difficult situation that he's in.
Well, just to put it at the beginning, he was made bankrupt. He had a small business, made bankrupt. We're owing £250 of VAT, more or less. And basically his whole life's been taken apart as a result. Sorry, carry on anyway.
Yeah, so obviously the insolvency service involved kind of at the back end. So when bankruptcies happened, that's when the official receiver who works for the insolvency service will take over the handling of the case. Now, I don't really want to get into too many specifics. There is a complaints process, as I was going to mention. You already have. That is internal, but our understanding and our experience is that ought to be quite a rigorous complaints process. Now, the official receiver does have a balancing act as part of his role, but he's got to try and return what he feels he can to the creditors, but he should do that in a fair way, and that's why the complaints process is there. I think all I could add to that is if he were one of my clients, I would assist, I would help him with the complaint. If the official receiver's made a decision that somebody disagrees with, they've got that right. Ultimately, and this is where it can be quite tricky for clients. Ultimately, you can challenge certain official receivers' decisions in court, and that can often be the last route. And of course, somebody will probably need some specialist support to do that. They might even need legal advice, sort of beyond the specialisms of citizens advice, which we would try and find and refer to.
I think one of the points he's making, obviously, as I say, we can't go into the specific details of the case, but one of the points he's making is that no one's listening to him. He's getting situations where, for example, he replies, doesn't get a reply to his thing, and then about 3 or 4 weeks later, he gets a stroppy email saying he hasn't replied and they haven't looked at the file. So there's a lot of this sort of thing going on, adding to the pressures. He said he's also sought legal advice and found that he's not that kind of solicitor who doesn't want to charge him. Who wants to charge him sort of less than £2,000 for advice. He can't afford it. So I don't know where that leaves it. You know, is free legal advice in this type of scenario possible?
Probably not. There probably isn't a great deal of free legal advice. Unfortunately, we've lost legal aid for most advice. If a home is at risk, there might be legal aid available, and we'd certainly research those options with him. It does sound a very difficult position that he's in. Speaking as a debt advisor, I would want to help him, but obviously there's a limit as far as our scope will go, and we're aware and have been quite vocal on this sort of gap in affordable legal advice. Let's say the benefits of maybe getting debt advice, even at this late stage, is I think citizens advice certainly and others do have a strong reputation. We would try and put the point across to, I think we are talking about an official receiver here, and we could help advocate. But if it became a particular legal matter, then that is something that is usually charged for, unfortunately. But we'd maybe look to try and put him in touch with somebody affordable. Local citizens advice often, this is without promising anything, but local citizen advice will often arrange local arrangements. So where I used to work, for instance, at a bureau, we had a solicitor come in and do some free work for a certain amount of time. So what I would say is the advice picture might be different in one area to another, but citizens advice locally will have a really good picture of what is available in and around their region.
So earlier on in the programme, we looked in detail at a report called State of Caring, published by Carers UK. Before we come on to some of the findings of that, I'd just like to get your reaction to what, in a nutshell, is your advice to someone who feels they have a problem coming or are in the middle of a crisis? What's your best advice in the simplest way to them?
So, obviously, understandably, it's a very personal situation, and we appreciate people probably do panic. That's an instant reaction, but actually, an advisor will generally have seen a similar case before. A debt advisor will have seen a great deal of complicated cases, difficult cases to deal with, and will know how to deal with that. They'll listen, they won't judge. Nothing will really shock them. That's their role. Do get advice. Don't flounder. Get that advice as early as you feel you're able to. We're aware a lot of people will leave it, either whether that's through optimism or a bit of fear of the unknown. One of the strong messages I think we always like to put out is get that advice, get it for free, and get it very early.
Okay, let's turn on to the State of Caring report. There's just a couple of findings I'd just be interested to hear from you about. One, I suppose, is perhaps similar expressions of the same thing. 37% of the people in the survey, this is around 7,000 people you'll recall, described their financial situation as struggling to make ends meet. 47% say they have to cut back on essentials such as food and heating to survive each month. Is that a familiar scenario to you?
Unfortunately, it is, and those figures are obviously particular to carers. They're worrying. They're not nice figures to hear, and it is what we're seeing on the ground. So, yes, people are struggling. People are struggling with their daily bills. I said earlier about the debts that we're seeing over the last 10 years have changed character. So it's not typically now credit, debt and overdrafts. It might be some of that as well, but usually what people are really struggling with that their household finances, their council tax, their electricity and gas. And like you say, just finding the money to eat. So these are very stark choices. It kind of sits behind debt advice. Debt advice solutions alone are not going to solve those sorts of issues. So again, we, along with other charities, we do an awful lot of campaigning to try and get a better deal in terms of financial products that are out there, in terms of the impact of things like welfare reform. We've been very vocal with those sorts of things. But yeah, not good figures, and we'll carry on saying what we're saying and try and change things for the better.
And just finally, some people are finding the solution, in fact, around 35%, that's around a third, so they felt they had to give up work altogether to care for the person, their family, friend or relative. And 16% said they had to at least cut back on their hours to live up to their caring responsibilities. A natural consequence, I guess.
I think so. I mean, I haven't been in the position of being a carer. It must be a really hard choice. What I would say is, taking us back to what we discussed earlier around looking at what financial support is there. A key part of debt advice and a key part of that general sort of financial guidance that we give is to try and look at things that might help, that people might not have thought about. Try and maximise income, and in some cases we're able to do that really successfully, and those outcomes are brilliant. We still see cases where people have already done that or are getting what they're entitled to, and yes, we'll always do the best we can. We'll always again look at ways your outgoings might be reduced, but there's only so much people can do, and this again is a bit of a recurrent theme. We're seeing a lot of people struggling to make ends meet, and we'll carry on providing evidence of that in our campaigning work.
So in effect, in that last scenario, perhaps if someone seriously is contemplating giving up work because the caring workload is too high, maybe pause and go and get some advice, do you think, just briefly?
I think that's very sensible. Yeah, so don't panic, or if you've panicked, just have that breath, big deep breath, and come and see us. Yeah, if I can, I mean, I'd say come and see us. You can find your local bureau if you go on citizensadvice.org.uk. You can search for your local Citizens Advice there and find where's nearest to you. And our advice lines 0344 0344 144. So you can give us a ring, and there's web chat available online as well.
Thank you very much indeed, Graham O'Malley from the Citizens Advice Bureau. Thanks for coming along and giving us a good insight into debt and money advice matters. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Okay, stop there. I just need to make sure it's recorded.